Mac's not her only target, Nunzio said. She's still here. You? Asked Frank. Me, Nunzio said. Here's the short of it. Back in 57, when this guy Lonzo killed Angie's mother and stepfather and thought he killed Angie, they had a guest, Timothy Jules. Jules worked for me, but was one of the guys who planned the hit on me 3 years ago. I remember that with a couple of nights, Hart nodded. Right. So a couple of days after Lonzo hit the family, he called me to make sure that I wasn't angry with him about killing Jules. On that call, he told me that before he shot Jules, Jules said he worked for me in New York. Lanzo, being Lanzo, said, Signore, Nunzio Sabino said to say hello and goodbye. Ciao, ciao. Now, assuming Angie was hiding in the house, she must have heard Lanzo talking to Jules and believed I had something to do with the hit on her family. I'm telling you, she's still in the city. Only Pepe knows I asked Lonzo to hit Angie and her family, and I want to keep it that way. And anyway, I told them enough, Nunzio thought. I'd offer you protection, but you don't want that, said Hartz. Anyone have a clue as to the description? Italian, dark hair, dark eyes, early 20s, Father Joe said. Probably look like half the women in this neighborhood. My guys in Naples are working with the police to find out more. I'll let you know. Nunzio twirled his glasses. I have a good contact in Interpol. They have fingerprints, photos, everything. I'll ask them to put together a composite if they can, Johnny said. They're fast. I'll pass along whatever they send me. This is terrific, Hart said. Hey, and thanks, Heather. Heather sat alone. Heather sat stone still and silent. She smiled weakly when she was thanked, but she said nothing. She just stared at an invisible spot between now and then. I loved that last line. That's why I chose that excerpt from Nunzio's Way by Nick Chiarkas. Welcome, Nick. He is the award-winning author of Weepers, Nicholas Chiarkas. So nice to have you here today, Nick.
It's so nice to be here. Thanks for reading that. You read it very well.
I wish I could do the Italian New York accents a little better.
You were good. You were good. You were believable.
All right. So tell us a little bit about Nunzio's Way. Where does this tale pick up after the first book, Weepers?
So, without giving a lot away about Weepers, in Weepers, Angelo and a group of his friends decided to form a gang just for their own protection from other kids. He's about 12 years old in Weepers. And the most notorious gang, Satan's Knights, pick on him a lot. By the end of the book, the Weepers, Angelo's gang, defeats Satan's Knights with the help from Nunzio. Angelo's mother is Nunzio's goddaughter, and they have that relationship. Also during Weepers, Angelo saves Nunzio's life, and so they become friends in a very special way, uncle and nephew kind of way. Weepers ends in 1957. Nunzio's Way picks up in 1960. Mm-hmm. And in 1960, I picked that date because there was an election for a mayor of New York. And for the first time, the Democratic Party of New York City was not going to support the present Democratic mayor. They were looking for somebody else. The mayor was running anyway. So Nunzio's lawyer comes to him in the beginning of Nunzio's Way and asks Nunzio's help in becoming the next mayor. To which, as you know, Nunzio says, pal, in this city, you can have anything you want if you kill the right 4 people. And so it becomes a bit political.
Yeah.
Um, Nunzio is, if anything, is not a bully, but he's not to be trifled with.
Yeah.
So it picks up 3 years later, which is, and then I'll stop, but which is difficult in writing because you have to imagine um, what all the characters have become over the last 3 years. How has Angelo changed? How has Angelo's mother changed?
Mm-hmm.
The relationship with Father Joe and Nunzio. How has Nunzio changed? And so you want to create that seamlessly. You want to create enough backstory so somebody can pick this up who did not read Weepers and read it as a standalone. But you want to also you don't want to include too much backstory so that
Right.
somebody that did read Weepers, and that's kind of a tough line.
Tricky
And
balance.
that is, yes, that's a tricky balance,
Mm-hmm.
as I wrote Nunzio's Way. But that's where Nunzio's Way picks up. And the answer to the question directly is Nunzio's Way is to be a fox when there's traps and a lion when there's wolves. And so this is more of a focus on Nunzio and how he lives his life and his childhood a little bit growing up.
Yeah. Um, and just quickly, don't you find it's easier to pick up part of the series because you know those characters already, and you don't have to set up the scene and the location and all of those things?
It it's both, right? So I know them very well, and I know I set up the scene, and I know what everything looks like. And sometimes I'll forget that my reader might not know what the cafe looks like and might not know what Angelo's Weepers are like. Um, and so I have to remind myself that somebody coming to this for the first time, will they know where Catherine Street is, where
Right.
Madison Street is? And I don't want to go through the whole thing again as I
Yeah.
did in Weepers. But yeah, I have to remind myself that I know it, but I need to make sure that the reader knows it.
Right.
Also, if I can,
Yeah.
um, I truly believe that in writing, at least for me, about 70% of it is research. And so, even though I lived in the Al Smith projects in apartment 5E in one of the buildings, and I could probably draw a sketch of the layout, I still wrote to the New York Housing Authority and asked for floor plans for the different apartments, including the one I lived in. So if I describe somebody walking into a room and seeing something, that I know they could see it from the doorway, etc.
Right.
So, so a lot of it is research too.
Yeah, I was wondering, that's one of my questions I was going to ask too, is were you able to find like original documents, or like diaries and letters or newspapers online, or do you interview people directly in your research?
Yeah, good question. I interviewed people directly and interviewed my uncle Mario a great deal. I'm sorry,
No worries.
um, who is fictionalized Nunzio. But I also do a lot of research. And for Weepers, it was a lot of library time, interestingly,
Hmm.
and some online. But I've learned that I can go to the New York Times archives and other archives and find out what people were wearing, what they called what they were wearing. They didn't call their jeans, they called them dungarees.
Right.
Um, I had to, it was fun to find out little facts. I don't know if this is a fact, but for example, talking to women that I grew up with in the projects and saying, how did you guys dress? Talk about that. I remember jeans and cuffs rolled up and they were real big and you wore a scarf. And this one young woman said, oh, those were hickey scarves. I had no idea. And so you find out such interesting little things by talking to people that you might not find out if you just did the research in the book.
Yeah. It must make it fun too.
It does. It does make it fun. And the language and what people said and what songs they like. Mm-hmm. And I remember asking Mario, who is, again, Nunzio. And Mario just died in March. He was 99 years old. Oh. And it's a great loss. What was his favorite song from back then? And I figured it would be one of Frank Sinatra's songs, but I wasn't sure. And he said it was the Purple People Eater. That was, I had no idea. Yeah. And that's why talking to people is so important, in addition to the other research. So I do both. I always do both.
That's great. So what drew you to write the historical fiction, and what appeals to you about using that as a vehicle to tell your story?
Wow. Good question. I wanted to unmask for people that didn't know what it was like to grow up in a New York City housing project in the 50s. And I wanted to unmask that because in college, I studied sociology. And so, and especially social deviance. And maybe better to understand myself, what it was like growing up poor at that point. It became, actually, I have to tell you this, and then I'll go back. It became like living twice, and remembering lots of stuff that was troubling to me. But I wanted to unveil that. I wanted to say, this is what it was really like growing up poor. I remember a friend of mine recently saying, when a kid gets stopped by the cops, they should just cooperate. I don't know why these kids in these tough neighborhoods just don't tell the police what they want to know. Well, they don't do that because they have to live in that neighborhood.
Right.
And living in that neighborhood and every day, how you're respected is way more important than what the cop will do to you if you smart mouth the cop. You don't know that. I remember a politician who I won't mention talking about a kid that did something at school and was nasty to his teacher. And anyway, what the politician said was, if that was me, I have to tell you, when I came downstairs to the breakfast room the next day, my father would let me have it. And I remember saying, okay, 3 things wrong with that. First, you came downstairs. You lived in a place that within your house, you had a stairway. Second, you have a breakfast room where you actually eat breakfast. And there's a father there. Yeah. Imagine all those things gone. And that's what that mother is facing. Right. And that's hard. That's really hard. So in many ways, I wanted to unmask it. I wanted to tell the truth about what it was like growing up poor in the projects. And I think the best way to tell the truth is through fiction. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wrote both books, Weepers and then Nunzio's Way.
Yeah. 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 No, we've talked about that before and you've said that. And I think it's so true. So Angelo is still growing up and he's watching all of the things his godfather Nunzio is doing. But Angelo's story takes sort of a back seat in this book. So why did you choose to switch the focus?
Um, there's a lot I like about Angelo. Um, I don't know if I ever told you this, but when I first started Weepers, uh, Angelo's name was Nicky,
Oh,
and he couldn't do anything wrong. He was the greatest kid in the world, and I had to get rid of Nicky. So he vanished, and I had to have an Angelo. Um, but what you learn about Nunzio, and he's going to have a greater effect on Angelo as the series continues. But what you learn about Nunzio in Weepers is he's interesting in ways he's likable, but you don't know much about his heart and what he thinks about. And there wasn't many scenes where it was through Nunzio's point of view. And he's a more interesting character than I presented in Weepers, and he's a more interesting character than has been presented in books on organized crime.
mm-hmm.
Um, um,
Yeah.
Nunzio once told me as a kid to read The Prince, and I can remember talking to him about it later, and we would have these talks. He liked to feed pigeons in City Hall Park, and so did my father, and they were friends from the time they were children. And we would often go there and with a little brown bag full of peanuts and feed the pigeons. That was great fun. And I remember asking him, he asked me if I read it. And I said I did. Is it true that it's better to be feared than to be loved? And Nunzio said to me, uh, he said it's better to be, it's safer to be feared than loved, not better. But fear tastes like sulfur, and love tastes like family dinner at home. And if I can't have both, I pick love. Plus, love will take a bullet for you, whereas fear will get out of the way and wish the bullet well as it passes. And I think there was a wisdom
Yeah.
to Nunzio that was missing in Weepers. And I wanted to have a rounder, fuller view of who this Nunzio Sabino is
Yeah.
for the readers. And that's why Nunzio's Way is obviously the name of it is to be a fox when there's traps and a lion when there's wolves.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really beautiful story. And I have to ask, what is coming next for Angelo and Nunzio?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I can't tell you. Oh,
I
that's
want
a
to know.
difficult question. Um, um, Angelo and Danny. I want to say more about Danny in the next book, who becomes a New York City cop
Mm-hmm.
in Nunzio's Way, are both very, very influenced by Nunzio and Nunzio's Way. But I can't tell you more than that yet.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Darn it. I know we're just
It,
launching this book. This Nunzio's Way comes out today.
it does. It
Yes.
does.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me, Nick. This has been great. And congratulations on your launch. And wish you all the best success.
Thank you so much. It's
Yeah.
very nice of you. What are you writing now?
I'm working on a couple of different projects, but I'll tell you about that later.
All right,
All
Tracy.
right. Tell readers where they can find you.
At on Amazon or at Henschel House Publishing. Kira Henschel is my publisher. It's a medium-sized publisher in Milwaukee. She does traditional publishing if you're interested in that, and also some hybrid publishing.
Mm-hmm.
She's wonderful. She's wonderful, and she'll be at the book launch, of course.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, great. I will see you tonight at your book launch at Mystery to Me in Madison, Wisconsin. And I think that there's that's going to be recorded as well.
Yeah, it's a Zoom, not a Zoom, but a crowdcast.
Yeah,
Is that
I think
correct?
so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it can be a crowdcast as well as live.
that's great. All
It'll be
right.
fun. I'm
Well,
glad you're going to be there.
yeah. Congratulations.
Thanks for this.
All
Thank you
right.
very much. Bye, my friend.
Bye-bye.